And now we're going to talk about evangelizing. Preach, brother Dimitri.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everybody. So I look at how I became interested in anything that I like to consume in culture: books, movies, music, theater. And it's always been a combination of people, like my grandmother taking me to every movie in Kiev, and booksellers in LA that I befriended, like Sherry and Lydia and Arthur, who owned Dangerous Visions and Change of Hobbit, and authors I met at conventions, and the classical music enthusiast where I worked as an intern, who told me I had to listen to Grosse Fuge by Beethoven, and I went out and bought it on CD and bought a CD player to listen to it. And critics, movie critics like Kenneth Turan and Mike Davis and Michael Ventura and Steve Erickson, who were real writers and real authors who happened to write movie reviews in the LA Weekly that I would read as a teenager and become excited about movies from filmmakers I've never heard of and say, "Mom, Dad, we have to go see Road Warrior. It's a great movie." When I started buying books, when I started for myself, when I started watching movies for myself, when I started buying CDs to listen to music, I read reviews. I read thick books of reviews. I read reviews in free newspapers to help me make my decisions, to help me curate the choices that I was going to make in my cultural consumption. When I went to the theater for the first time, when I went to classical concerts for the first time, I read Broadway reviews in the New York Times. I read music reviews of operas and symphonies in the newspapers. I had to make my first choice. I bought my first movie ticket to Trading Places based on a movie review. I bought my first ticket to a Broadway play based on a play review, based on a theater review, by critics who were addressing me. In part, they were addressing someone who's never been to a Broadway play, who's never paid for a movie, who maybe never read an unassigned book, and found a way to communicate their excitement about movies, their excitement about theater, their excitement about books, their excitement about classical music, all these kind of difficult topics, all these things for rather refined tastes, to someone with just a curiosity and a general interest, to reel them in. They were great evangelizers. Most reviews of games are for fans. If I don't know much about games, if I don't know about the major mechanisms, if I listen to a typical review of a game, I'm not going to get anything out of it. Because it's not addressed to a person with just a passing interest. And it doesn't really communicate the excitement of what playing a game is like.
Can you tell me, I'm sorry to interrupt, can you tell me what reviews you're talking about? Are you talking about like a Rahdo video showing how to play a game, or what reviews are you talking about?
I'm not going to... Okay, so for me, when I listen to a review, I'm an expert. I've been playing games for 15 years. And I know what people are talking about. But when I put myself into the boots, even of some of the reviews we do on our own podcast, when I put myself into the boots of someone who's new to the hobby, or maybe a book reader, or a theater goer, or a classical music aficionado, or someone who goes to museums, I was describing to an NPR producer who are board game players. And I said, well, the same people who buy hardcover books. And that makes sense. People with disposable income.
Are you talking about Kristen?
Sure.
Okay.
People with disposable income, people with time, people interested in culture, people interested in intellectual pursuits. why haven't we, or rather, to put it in a positive way, we have to develop a language that would communicate the excitement of playing a game to someone who's never played a game before. We have to figure out how to describe the specific excellences of a particular game to someone who is not a fan already. Because the only way to get anyone to go to a concert or to go to a movie is to say, Road Warrior is the greatest action movie ever made, and that's why action movies are amazing. And you should go and buy your first ticket to that movie. You should go and buy your first Broadway ticket to that play because it is an amazing musical. Not only are musicals amazing, but this particular musical is amazing for these reasons. And I myself don't have the language to do that. And I haven't heard the language to do that.
I think what's hard is that games a lot of games, especially ones that we talk about, are very complicated, and there's always, it's never quite clear what is the purpose of a game review. Sometimes I think is it to say this is how a game plays, and me telling you how the game plays will let you know if this is something that sounds fun for you, or is this or do you just not really care about the rules? You just want to hear my opinions on it. And I think sometimes it's unclear what people want out of those situations. I mean, ideally, you want both. I think, one thing that drives me nuts is when I watch a video on Board Game Geek or something like that, like a review, and you sit through 18 minutes of rules explanations, which you mostly fast forward, and then you get about 45 seconds of, so yeah, I really enjoyed this game. I think this is really fun. And I think that if you are the sort of person that really enjoys like this sort of style of game, then you'll love it. I'm like, well, why did I just sit through 20 minutes of that, So I think reviews are oftentimes, there's not a lot of uniformity in the art of a game review at the moment.
Yeah, here's where the difference is. In order to watch a movie or a play or a musical or an opera, you need to buy a ticket and sit in a seat. You are a passive consumer of it. You are not a passive consumer of games. In order to play games, you have to learn. You have to work. You have to do things. It is a radically different medium. And because of that, a review cannot just be a go check this out. It can't be that. It needs to be an explanation to some degree. It needs to be a description. It needs to lay out the experience that you are going to be working at. And it is work. Yeah. The Stanford Behavioral Lab has done some amazing work in determining what goes into behavior. What are the components that go into behavior? If you want to get somebody to do A, what are the things that go into that decision? And they came up with 3 things that are what need to happen that trigger it: motivation, ability, and a prompt. Right? You need motivation to do this. If you're changing a habit, like if you want to wake up earlier in the morning to get to the gym, right? You need motivation to do that. Now, most people focus on the motivation, but actually motivation is the slipperiest of those 3 things, right? It's the one that will wax and wane and is unpredictable and hard to do. Reviews are all about motivation. Reviews are all, everything you described, Dimitri, when you were telling a very eloquent story of how you got excited about things, is exactly about that, about getting excited about things. Reviewers can give you a motivation to get up off your couch, to go to a theater, to pay your hard-earned money. If it's a play, if it's a Broadway play, to pay a lot of money, right?
Almost as much as it costs to buy a copy of Food Chain Magnate.
Yeah. Which, by the way,
it's also.
Go ahead, Ben.
I was gonna say if you look at in all of Dimitri's examples, though, he was consuming art basically, and if you look at sports, professional sports, there is discussion. If you were to tune in to any of the like Around the Horn or whatever on ESPN, they are not talking as if their audience are people who've never watched sports before. They are talking high level about sports. If they're talking about football, they're saying things like, they could be saying things like zone defense. So they could talk about this should be a man-on-man play or whatever. And they are not concerned with getting new people in. And, with games, are games art or are they sport, right? Because if it's art, you want to tell people, hey, this is an experience that's worth having, and this is my feeling about it. Is it worth spending the money to have this experience? Whereas sport is sort of not like that. And in terms of like evangelizing people into sport, I don't even know how that happens. Is that just like cultural FOMO? Like if you're not watching the Super Bowl, you're missing out or something? But so it also just goes to show that you don't always have to talk to the audience as if they don't know anything about what you're talking about to evangelize, because sports can do that without a problem.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that we are not mass market. And one of the kind of beautiful things about our hobby is that our hobby is small. It's growing, and I'm super glad it's growing. We want the hobby to grow where, I think we all got together and created this podcast in order for it to grow. But it's not as easy as simple motivation. It's not as simple as just a review. The ability portion of those three things that behavioral researchers are finding out, the ability part of it, the ability for going to a movie is getting up and going to a movie and paying the money and finding the time. That's what it is. If it's on Netflix, hey, the ability became so much easier. It is so much easier to get that person, to motivate that person to do that, because the ability portion of it has become so easy. But any game, the easiest game in the world, doesn't just require a person to own the game, to get together with people in order to play it, to find out the time, all of the things that are the same as watching a movie or watching a play. But in addition to that, it is sitting down for a rules explanation and learning a game, and the fear of looking stupid or not figuring it out. And especially for people that don't have an experience in these games can be quite daunting, and the ability hurdle for them is huge, which is why game reviews have to be not just motivation, but they also have to be a bit of explanation.
I completely agree with both of you. And I have a few recommendations that go to Ben and Tom, exactly what you're talking about.
Hit it.
One is that game companies have to donate copies of games to school libraries and to public libraries for people to check out and to play them. Because, Ben, you say, how do people get socialized into sports? By participating in sports in high school, by actually playing basketball, by actually playing baseball, by actually playing football. This is a great way to get kids socialized into understanding what games are.
Yeah.
The other thing about rules, Tom, the half hour of rules explanation. Rules, in my opinion, should be written not by game designers, but by professional writers, by technical writers who know how to explain rules to people. Game designers are not necessarily the best people to do that.
No, they appear to be the same people that do the IKEA description.
Exactly. So I think that paying a couple of $1,000, and of course, I'm a writer, Tom, you're a writer, Ben, you're a writer, almost all of us on the podcast are writers. And it's very self-serving for me to say, hire a writer, we're the best. But hire a writer, we're the best at this. I've never seen, Matt talks about reading rule books with pleasure. But Matt also has a degree in Russian literature. So in these big, thick, long books by Dostoevsky that are not quite as impenetrable as a PAX rule book, but almost, right?
Let's recognize that rules have gotten so much better. I mean, we have gone from the Avalon Hill rule books of the 1980s, which are, oh my God, they do not appear to be written by people who have ever spoken English. They are written by engineers for engineers and are impenetrable to the layman, to nowadays where I would say the majority of rule books are fairly well written and followable.
But they're not fun and interesting and exciting in and of themselves, like they could be if a professional writer did it.
I mean,
And-
I think that makes I think the rule book, having a good rule book, definitely makes gaming more accessible. I don't know if it's going to evangelize people personally. I look at video games because video games have what Tom was talking about before in terms of theater, movies, whatever. Those are all passive experiences, but video games are not.
Yeah.
And video games are able to evangelize because I think that one thing that's happened with the video game industry that I don't really think has really happened with the board game industry, and I am putting a huge asterisk on this because I know I'm not involved really deeply in the board game industry itself. But I feel like the video game industry has sort of matured and formalized and in a way that movies and TV and sports and theater and books and publishing all have many years ago. And board games really haven't, if you ask me. I think, when Tapestry came out last year, Jamie Stegmaier released I think it was on his newsletter or made an announcement, hey, on this date, this game is being launched. There'll be a pre-sale, and then after that, it's going to be launching, and then that. And there was like a clear timeline, and there was a clear date, and he was able to build publicity around having set dates. Like, this is the day that this game is coming out. And honestly, and it was a huge success. Mm-hmm. And if you look at other games, because of the way the industry is, they come out sort of in these drips and drabs, and like, oh, there's this game. Oh, it was at Essen. There's a few games that came out in Essen. Oh, and then it's here. And when's it gonna be stateside? I don't know. Oh, look, Cool Stuff has it for pre-order. Oh, it's here. It's like this. It kind of just sort of like they just sort of like flow in from the sea, right? And like that's how the board game industry works. But if you have a company that says, okay, we previewed this game at Essen, we are launching it worldwide on October 3rd or whenever the date is, and you can then build in marketing campaigns and PR, and you can from that you start to get articles, you start to get publicity. Publicity starts to stoke interest. You get like several reviews coming out all at once. These are ways that you get people interested in the hobby.
The difficulty, though, of course, is that we're talking about a physical deliverable with an international supply chain versus a digital deliverable, which you can name day and date on those things. You can name day and date on movies. You can name day and date on video games, on board games. Listen, you and I, we have many Kickstarters, and we're like, when is it coming in? Well, it could be now. It could be in 6 weeks. Oh, it got held up in customs. It's going to be 12 weeks from now.
But Tom, Jennifer,
books were not. Books are continue to be physical, and video games until recently were pretty much all physical.
True, but they don't have international supply chains. Books are printed in the countries that they're made.
It's not just the supply chain; it's the organization, and it's an active and proactive going after new customers. Jennifer was talking about how video games on this podcast a few episodes ago. Jennifer was talking about how video games actively sought out marginalized people as customers.
Yes.
Why don't board games do that?
Well,
it's a matter not just
of
physical supply chain. It's a matter of a mindset that turns someone like me into an inadvertent gamekeeper. And I hate to be an inadvertent gamekeeper.
You mean gatekeeper?
Thank you so much. A gatekeeper. Yeah. Because I will drag anybody to a Tarkovsky movie. I will drag anybody to Children of Paradise, a 3.5-hour black and white movie with subtitles in French. I will buy a 1,000-page book for somebody that's very difficult to read. And
I still use that as a doorstop.
Sure, thank you, Tom.
It is great.
And here's the thing. You say that watching a movie or listening to a concert or seeing an opera or reading a book or even going to a meal that's challenging at some fancy place or at some really difficult place.
Do I have to learn how to chew in a different way?
Sure you do,
no,
if you're going to Vespertine.
But
in any case, these are passive experiences, but they're still difficult experiences. They're still experiences that require attention and patience and analysis and an active intellectual engagement. And all these reviewers and critics in these fields have found a way to balance, a way to discuss these works in a way that presents their complexity to the audience,
right,
and also encourages them to attend. And I want to see a board game review column in the New York Times that would be a pleasure to read for any reader, and would get them to...
Paste Magazine has one.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that, Ben.
Well, actually, this is sort of funny. It's not. I don't think it's a regular one, but the guy who writes it, I'm blanking on his name, but he is a baseball guy. He actually is a baseball commentator or baseball writer, but he also loves board games, and he writes, articles in Paste Magazine. And I think your point about there, it would be wonderful if there were standing columns in places like the New York Times is a great one. And by the way, everything we're saying is with the asterisk of for those who believe that board gaming should be evangelized, because there are a lot of people who feel like we like it the way it is. We like that we're this quirky community that is very niche, and we don't need it to be in everyone. But for, I think, all of us, though, we love bringing more people into it because that means there's more people to play with.
Oh yeah.
And so I love the idea of really more of a formal approach to board game criticism, because right now you can go out, you can listen to podcasts, which are great. A lot of people have made videos, but if you want to go like read some reviews, it's kind of like the Wild West out there. There's some sites. There's a site I enjoy called islaythedragon.com. There's Shut Up and Sit Down. But ultimately, when you go to a lot of these sites, it kind of looks like you're going to a blog, right? And even if you go to BGG, which is like ground zero for board gaming, this is like where I go to 50 million times a day. It's where I get so much of my content. But if you really think about it, if you're a new person, if you're like, oh, I hear that board gaming is a thing now, and you go to BGG and you look at that site, it kind of looks like a giant like internet forums. And there was a lot of stigma around internet forums. People think about trolls. They think about like sort of nerdy, like whatever internet culture. And some people may just go there and just be kind of turned off. And so, and it's also like a lot of information just like right in your eyes, right at once. Mm. So I think it would be great if we had, people who had if we had something that had sort of the polish of like a New York Times article or a Rolling Stone or something like that. I think that'd be wonderful.
I agree. Listen, I want to be clear. I was talking about when I said the international supply chain and all that sort of stuff, I'm talking specifically about why the anticipated release of a game is different than anything else. Sure. That said,
that's why I said I don't know the industry. That's why I'm like, sure. I feel like there's reasons why it's like that, but I don't know the reasons.
Yeah, it's because it's because there are too many variables in that particular equation. That in order for it to work, it'd have to be like an iPhone launch where they have the iPhones in stock for a while, and then today is the day we're going to release them. But the reality is that we have a Kickstarter model for the most part in our hobby, and people don't want to wait. People have been waiting a long time already. But what we were talking about in that comment, you were talking about how video games have a learning mode where you're learning the game as you go. And we do have that in board games. Most board games have the easy version and then the complete version, right? And you learn the easy version first. Tends to be the easy version, though. You still have to spend a lot of time learning most of the rules before you get to it. And we just skip it. We just go right to the full board. But I will say that both in terms of the rulebook design and in terms of that learning mode, there is one designer I can think of that does an amazing job of that in our hobby, and that's Vlaada Chvátil. Vlaada Chvátil did games like first of all, Codenames and all that sort of stuff, but also he did Space Alert and he did Dungeon Lords and Dungeon Pets. And those are rule books which you, Dimitri, would love to read. They are fun. They are fun to read. They are humorous. Every other line you're laughing because they're written narratively.
Oh, that's great.
And Dungeon Lords in particular, I think may be the best because not only is it written that way, but it's like, for instance, it's one of those games where you're placing workers and there are 3 spaces or 4 spaces in each section of the board.
You want to talk about unforgiving.
Yeah. The first space gives a little bit, the second space gives a lot. The third space gives a bad thing, right? And it's that sort of thing.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right?
Yeah, I played that game.
And the rule book is hilarious because it's explaining why the first person in, the first goblin in got this much stuff. The second one, he dug down to the good stuff. And the third one, it was all empty or whatever. And they wonderful, hilarious explanations. But not only that, it has a training mode, just like in a video game, where it walks you through a super short scenario for each player to play a super mini puzzle that is going to explain how all the systems of a fairly complex game work and do it in a wonderful way. And it is a joy to read. So is Space Alert. Hilarious, fun as heck, really a joy to read. I encourage game designers out there to look at the work of Vlaada Chvátil and listen. Your games may not be humorous. His games are humorous, so it's a little bit easier to do that. But I do think that there's a lot more, and technical writers or just writers need to spend more time.
All writers are technical writers.
It's almost like the board game industry is.
I'm not. Donating copies to city and school libraries, I think, is crucial. I think what is happening where Asmodee is pulling back things from Tabletop Simulator is as ridiculous as saying that it's almost like Tabletop Simulator saying, we have to go to these game groups that are playing our game because only one person bought that game and we need to stop the other people that haven't bought that game from playing that game. It's absolutely regressive and ridiculous.
And ultimately, probably the best way to evangelize is you bring the games to where the people are. Okay, you don't try to make the people come to where you are. And so if that means having getting a column in the New York Times where people are reading, if that means bringing a game, having the game at school where there are kids who might want to be playing it after school. I mean, that's how you do it. And then ideally you then start to get a critical mass where then you don't have to, the industry doesn't have to evangelize as much anymore because it's just like, if you don't know that, if you're not participating, you're kind of missing out, right?
This is the one time I'll say it. It worked in Germany.
Wow.
It can work in the United States.
Wow.
One time, I will say.
I agree.
Because the Germans
did take off. It took off very well in Berlin, and now look, you can get it all across the world.
The trains ran on time.
No, that's Italy, Tom.
Unbelievable.
That's Mussolini.
Unbelievable.
Not German.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.